kill his wife and mother of his 3 children.
Robert Frada has been on death row for nearly 3 decades and is scheduled for execution tomorrow night in Huntsville.
I apologize profusely to all the victims. I make no excuses. I belong in prison.
That was like my 2-year-old apologizing for hitting it didn't mean anything.
I just wanted to live long enough to know that justice was carried out.
In 2024, some of the most chilling death row executions revealed stories of unimaginable crimes and long-fought battles for justice. Today, we'll start with one of the most dangerous and debated cases that shocked the world. So stay tuned. Scott Izember. Scott James Izember, 62, was executed in Oklahoma for the murders of A.J. and Patsy Cantrell, a crime he committed over 20 years ago. The execution took place at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, where he was given a lethal injection. As the drugs started working, Izember spoke his final words, telling his children he loved them and sharing a moment with his spiritual advisor. He was later declared unconscious before being pronounced dead. Izember's lawyers acknowledged that he was responsible for the killings, but they argued that they were not planned, saying he acted on impulse. Despite their appeal for mercy, the Pardon and Parole Board voted against it. For the Cantrell family, this brought a sense of closure, but they were frustrated by the long wait for justice. They also called for better mental health care and more focus on preventing domestic violence. The crime began when Izember broke into the Cantrells' home, hoping to find his ex-girlfriend. Instead, he ended up killing A.J. and Patsy. He was convicted of first-degree murder for A.J.'s death and second-degree murder for Patsy's. In his final statement, Izember expressed peace, stating that it had taken too long for justice to be served and that he loved his children. He also reflected on how much he had changed over the years. After the killings, Izember went on the run, leading to one of the biggest manhunts in Oklahoma's history. He was found in the couple's car, but not before committing more crimes in Arkansas, including kidnapping a doctor and his wife. He was eventually captured after a confrontation in which the doctor shot him. Before his execution, Izember fought to have his spiritual advisor present, a request that was initially denied because of the advisor's anti-death penalty stance. However, a Supreme Court ruling later supported his right to have the advisor with him. The lethal injection process used in Oklahoma involved 3 drugs: midazolam to make him unconscious, a paralytic to stop movement, and potassium chloride to stop his heart. Donald Dilbeck. Donald David Dilbeck was executed in Florida after spending over 30 years on death row for the murder of Faye Vann. His execution took place at Florida State Prison, where he was strapped to a gurney and given a lethal injection. Witnesses, including some of Faye Vann's family, watched through a window as the procedure happened. Before he died, Dilbeck criticized Governor Ron DeSantis, saying that DeSantis caused more harm to people than he did. Dilbeck's crime was committed in the 1990s when he brutally killed Faye Vann in Tallahassee. Robert Frada. Robert Frada, a former police officer from a suburban area near Houston, met his end on January 10, 2023, after being found guilty of planning the murder of his estranged wife, Farah Frada. The crime took place nearly 30 years earlier, during a difficult divorce and custody battle. At 65 years old, Frada was executed by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. His execution marked the conclusion of a long and painful legal battle that spanned decades. In his final moments, Frada lay strapped to a gurney in the death chamber, with a powerful sedative, pentobarbital, flowing through his veins. His spiritual advisor knelt beside him, praying for peace and healing for all involved. When asked if he had any last words, Frada simply said, "No." As the drugs took effect, his eyes closed and his breath slowed, becoming deep snores until they finally stopped altogether. The case against Frada had been strong, with prosecutors claiming that he had masterminded his wife's murder and hired a shooter to carry it out. Farah Fratta was gunned down in her own garage in Atascocita, a Houston suburb. Robert Fratta had expressed a desire to see his wife dead, and the evidence against him was damning. Fratta's lawyers tried to argue that some key evidence had been hidden, including witness testimony that had been influenced by hypnosis. They also raised concerns about the drugs used in the lethal injection, claiming they were expired. However, these arguments failed to stop the execution. Multiple courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, reviewed the case and all agreed that Fratta's sentence should stand. Fratta's legal saga began in 1996 when he was originally convicted and sentenced to death. However, his conviction was overturned due to issues with the admissibility of confessions made by his co-conspirators. His case went through numerous legal challenges over the years, and in 2009, a federal judge resentenced him to death. The judge described Fratta as egotistical, misogynistic, and vile, underscoring the severity of his crime and the nature of his character. Fratta's execution was delayed for over an hour as several appeals were considered, but in the end, the decision was made to carry out the sentence. His execution was the first in Texas in 2023. Throughout this long legal battle, Fratta never showed any remorse for his actions. Even in his final moments, he did not express regret or attempt to reconcile with his family. This lack of remorse was noted by Andy Cahan, the director of victim services at Crime Stoppers of Houston, who remarked on the missed opportunity for Fratta to show some remorse for the pain he caused. Farah's family had suffered greatly due to her tragic death. Despite the years that passed, Robert Fratta's actions had a lasting impact on his children and their lives. Farah's father, who had played a major role in raising the 3 children, had to deal with the heartbreak of losing his daughter in such a violent way. Fratta's execution brought a sense of closure for some, but it was clear that no amount of legal proceedings could erase the damage done to the family. If this case shocked you, wait until you hear about the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on these unbelievable stories. Darrell B. Barwick. In a case that shocked Florida, Darrell B. Barwick was executed for the brutal murder of Rebecca Went in 1986. Just months after being released from prison for a violent attack, Barwick broke into Went's Panama City apartment. He attacked her with a knife, stabbing her 37 times after she tried to resist his robbery attempt. The execution took place at Florida State Prison and was confirmed by Governor Ron DeSantis' office. Barwick's final appeal was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court, leading to the day of his execution. Antonio Franklin. Antonio Sanchez Franklin's execution in Ohio was approaching, drawing attention to the violent crimes he committed in 1997, a tragic and unsettling event that forever changed his family. Franklin, now 24 years on death row, was convicted of the brutal slayings of his grandparents and uncle. His troubled life leading up to the murders added complexity to his story. Raised in an abusive environment by an alcoholic mother, Franklin showed signs of promise in his school years, excelling academically despite the challenges at home. His situation worsened as he moved in with his grandparents and uncle, and his mental health began to deteriorate during his teenage years. Franklin began to show signs of severe mental distress. He became obsessed with the idea of being abducted by aliens, which fueled his paranoia. Alongside these fears, Franklin struggled with substance abuse, turning to drugs to cope with the internal turmoil he was experiencing. These factors combined to create a volatile and unstable environment for him, which set the stage for the tragic events of April 18, 1997. On that fateful night, Franklin, facing the pressure of having to move out, became involved in a heated argument with his uncle. The disagreement escalated quickly, and in a fit of rage, Franklin attacked his family members with a baseball bat. When the violence of the attack wasn't enough, Franklin grabbed a gun and shot his grandmother Ophelia in the head, ending her life. But the horror didn't end there. Franklin, desperate to cover his tracks, set the house on fire and fled in his grandmother's car, trying to escape the consequences of his actions. However, his escape was short-lived. The police quickly tracked him down in Tennessee, where he was found soaked in blood and still armed with the weapon he had used to kill. 3 lives were lost in a single night. Franklin later confessed to the police, explaining that years of mistreatment by his family, particularly an incident in which his uncle had allegedly abused him when he was just 14, had pushed him to violence. His confession highlighted the deep emotional wounds that had shaped his troubled state of mind. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Franklin's mental health remained a key issue. Although he was initially deemed fit to stand trial, his behavior grew increasingly erratic, and changes in his personality prompted concerns about his competency. These concerns led to recommendations for more restrictive measures during his trial. But despite appeals questioning his mental state, Franklin was convicted and sentenced to death for the brutal slayings. His case raised difficult questions about the intersection of mental illness and violent crime, with debates continuing about the fairness of the justice system in handling such cases. Richard Eugene Glossop. Richard Eugene Glossop, an inmate on death row at Oklahoma State Penitentiary, has been at the center of a highly debated case. He was convicted for allegedly ordering the 1997 murder of Barry Van Treese, but his conviction has sparked widespread attention due to a lack of solid evidence against him. The key witness in the case, Justin Sneed, actually carried out the murder, but pointed the finger at Glossop. Despite weak evidence and questions surrounding Sneed's testimony, Glossop has spent years fighting to prove his innocence. Over 20 lawyers from various parts of the country have worked together to review his case. They have been trying to stop his execution, pointing out that the evidence against him is far from convincing. The case took a dramatic turn when Oklahoma's controversial execution method failed in 2014, leading to increased attention on Glossop's situation. Glossop's case reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 2015, when the court ruled on the constitutionality of Oklahoma's 3-drug lethal injection protocol. While the ruling upheld the use of the method, it brought even more focus to the concerns about wrongful convictions and the treatment of prisoners on death row. Which of these cases did you find most disturbing? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that uncover the chilling truths behind these headlines.